All right. I think we can get started here. Welcome everyone to this is webinar. Well, this is our third webinar with the folks over at First Education Resources, but this is our second when it comes to our three-part webinar series on assessment. And today we're going to talk a little bit about possible over-reliance on standardized testing, or are we doing too much standardized testing? Um, Show of hands if I can. Well, no one's got their video up, but possible maybe uh, hand up if you think your school is doing too much standardized testing or not enough. Okay, I got a few hands. Thank you. So before we start on, I'll introduce myself. I am Daniel Rosenberg, managing director of Asia Pacific for Otis and Mindprint. And today I'm going to be talking to Don Smith. Would you like to introduce yourself, Don?
Yeah, so I am Don Smith, the Director of Professional Services here with First Educational Resources, and coming to you this morning from Chicago in the United States, where we can see the sun rising behind me this morning. It's going to be a beautiful day, but just super excited to talk all about assessment right now. And one of my roles in my previous past is I was the assessment director of our district before I was the Director of Teaching and Learning. So this was a topic that would be brought up with in my district quite a bit. I go to a lot of meetings about it, and our teachers would talk about this quite a bit. So I'm excited to dive in, Daniel, and talk to you today about it. So
Yeah, I appreciate you speaking with us. Before we begin, I would just like to get the marketing out of the way. What is Otis? What is Mindprint? Otis is one platform that lets you gather, analyze, and act on student performance data. We're talking assessments, grading and reporting, data analytics, and then you can take all that data and make it into a very nice plan to monitor students' progress. It basically in it's just all of your data in one place. So we can take all sorts of types of data, ingest it into Otis, and then give your admin, your teachers, even their parents and students a way to act on all of that achievement data that you guys in your classrooms are creating every day. Along with Otis, we have Mindprint, which is a 1 hour online diagnostic test that captures 10 different cognitive functions and then gives you strategies on how to best reach that child. So we're not testing what they know, but how they learn best, and then giving you the strategies to act on that. Now, if you weren't here last webinar, you may have missed a great session with Becky Pepler, also from the First Education Resources Stagger Center. And really, what we talked about was assessment misalignment. And so I do have a question for everybody out there on the Zoom, and that is, have you ever looked at a student score and thought, hmm, this doesn't actually reflect what they know?
I know I certainly have, Daniel. I can tell you that when I've looked at some of my assessments and thought, does this really pull out the information? And is there something missing here? So.
And for all those teachers out there, I know you were all once students. As a student, have you ever thought, or kind of when you're taking an assessment and you kind of go, well, I don't ever remember being taught this. I'll raise my own hand. That happened to me plenty of times. Maybe it was because I wasn't paying attention, but also maybe it was because there was assessment misalignment. And so what we talked about last webinar was that if if the assessment doesn't match the learning, then all of that data is worthless. And I think, and why I'm bringing this up is because when and I should go through and talk about a little about what we mean by assessment alignment, and that's having correct learning targets, making sure your student success indicators actually reflect those learning targets, making sure that teacher success indicators also reflect that. And those are the three functions that should be built into assessment. Am I missing anything here, Don?
No, and we're going to come essentially right back to this very topic when we dive into, I think, why we even have standardized tests to begin with. So I think this is the core of it, of if we don't have a clear alignment between what we originally wanted the students to know, what it should look like, and how we teach it, then that's where we get the assessment misalignment. So no, this is absolutely spot on, Daniel.
And so, but what does misalignment look like? It's missing different learning that's happening in the classroom. It could be something that's not on the assessment. It's overrepresentation on a particular subject and or possible standard. It's the wrong level of thinking when it comes to maybe it should be critical thinking when they're just kind of listing out evidence. And then there's a vague connection between the actual evidence and what's going on in the instruction. And I think we get a lot of maybe the unclear match when it comes to different international schools, especially because a lot sometimes teachers are teaching several different types of curriculum from different types of countries, and there might not be a one-to-one match there.
Daniel, can I just step into? I had a
Yeah.
discussion with one of my own kids the other day, one of my own children, and they were referencing a test that they were about to take, and they were doing some studying for it. But in the end, I said, "Well, what do you know about the test?" And they said, "Well, it's 30 multiple choice questions." And right away I said, now remember, I think a multiple choice question itself, I don't want to judge the question, but when there's 30 multiple choice questions, and that's the only type of question, I said to my child, I said, well, can you ask the teacher what the learning target is that you're on here? Do you know that at all? And my kid at that time did not, because I mean, whether it was shared or not, my kid maybe wasn't paying attention. I know sometimes that happens, right? But I said, if there's anything in there about describe or apply or explain, that format of the test doesn't have you do any of those things. And so that's one of those key times where there's a potential misalignment. And I said, now if there's multiple choice questions that then say explain your answer or describe how you came to that, maybe we can get closer to that. But that I think is an example of, to me, I can't imagine a learning target that will have 20 multiple choice questions that doesn't have describe something in there. So just want to, it's just 2 days ago I was talking to my own kid about that. I thought you would, that with the seeing this, it really resonates with me. So,
Especially with the wrong level of thinking.
mhm.
Anyway, we're again for those fear not, we will get into the heart of the issue. We're just going through a bit about what we talked about last webinar, mainly because I think it's so applicable to this discussion we're about to have. And then what does misalignment lead to? And that's where I think we're going to get a little more into the heart of the subject of tonight's webinar on standardized testing. But it can lead to inaccurate grades, weaker interventions, misidentified needs, and misleading data. And I'll just get cut straight to the heart of it. It could also lead to the need for more standardized testing because the data you're having is not necessarily aligned well. So
Hmm.
no one can use it as evidence or truth.
Hmm.
And so that's the big risk is that we're making decisions based on evidence that may not reflect learning. And that's possibly why more schools, more, I guess I'll say districts or school groups are leaning towards, I think, more summative and um, standards based. I'm sorry. What am I saying?
Standardized testing. Yeah.
Standardized testing.
Yeah.
A little bit about Otis is the tool, you could say, and First Education Resources is the know-how. How a tool can't fix all your problems. You need someone to lead the way, and they do it. They help with Otis clients all the time. And if you're interested, I very much urge you to reach out to Don.
And correct. As you said, that last part, that's when we have the right combination. And if when we have the right tool at the right time with the right thinking, that's when we truly see that successful implementation. And Daniel, as you have my next slide is just a little bit more about me. For those who didn't
Yep,
know,
go ahead.
say I'll just jump in quick. That's okay. I began my career as teaching science at the high school level, and I can tell you that when I was teaching, it was when I feel like standardized testing really began to become something. I remember it's a very controversial topic. We would talk about it a lot of time in our teachers' lounge, having deep discussions just about what's the purpose of this test, what does it mean, and I remember arguing with folks quite a bit about it on, I think, from all sides, and it's just a very controversial topic. And then from there, that's when I was an assistant principal, principal you saw in there, assessment coordinator, like I said, that will hit heavily in what we're doing now, as well as then director of teaching and learning. So I had the opportunity to talk a lot about this topic. And then at the very top, you also see we have a fires and grading podcast, wrote a book about extinguishing the fires and assessment grading, confidence to lead, as well as a school schedule kind of thing. So this is just a little bit about me. So.
And if you guys have not heard of the Fires and Grading podcast, I would definitely tune into that. I mean, you guys have some of the biggest bang for your buck guests. I think uh, was one of you had one guy just on standards-based grading who was, I think, one of the pioneers, no? Or
Yes, we
was
had
it?
so far we've had Rick Wormerly. We just had an episode that aired recently with Dr. Tom Gusky walking through the history of grading from about the 1840s until now. It's obviously that's in a U.S. kind of history of education, but it really talked about how do we get to the point of where we are now with grading. So we've had multiple guests on there. So yeah.
Yeah. And boy, what a beautiful family you got, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. I reference them all the time. I've two high school students and one eighth grader, so I'm always learning from them. So
Well, I have a 2-year-old, so and I don't want any more.
yes.
Let's keep going. Let's get to the heart of the topic.
Yeah. So our first part is that, and I put threw this one in there, Danielle. I don't know if you noticed the slide kind of appeared of, to me, I think first let's talk about what's the root of the problem? Okay. In coming from my perspective, why is it we see a true over-reliance? And I think it's only, I think, becoming more reliant on standardized testing. And this is a topic I think is schools need to address, and it connects to that previous webinar. So if you click one step ahead, and I think one of the biggest reasons, and leave it right here for a second as we look at this, is that if we look at our current data that we have in our classrooms, okay? Most of our grade books look something like what you're going to see on the left-hand side here. We have a list of assignments. You can see it's homework number one, math test, homework number two, quiz, math test number two. This is what many of our grade books, when we walk in from teacher to teacher and we pull it up, we say, this is what it looks like. But if we were to ask a question and say, well, what does the student know or not know? Okay. And when we look at this with many of our grade books that look like this, all of us are going to say, "Well, maybe I have no idea what that student knows." And while we might think we know, like I think back to when I was a teacher, I had about 140 students on my that I taught in my classes, okay, when I was at the high school level. So I might know the day I gave that quiz number one, Daniel, you're the 90%, okay? I might I remember I just graded your quiz, but a week later, now I've graded how many more quizzes, how many more assignments? And if you came up to me and said, what do I need to work on that quiz? I don't know if I could answer that for you and tell you kind of why or what are the things you need to work on. So if we jump ahead, Daniel, click ahead, I think 2 clicks for from your side. Uh,
Yeah, yeah. Is there any, can I just say something?
yeah, please do. Yeah, you always say it. It goes much to like,
Yeah, I know. We're working with a client, very, very similar, but in it from a different lens, where they gave us a lot of grade book data and said, make sense of this,
yes,
meaning which student is behind, which isn't. And the question that comes up, we can show you that students are behind, but we don't know what they're behind in.
yes,
We
yes,
don't know what they mastered and what they haven't mastered. So just a little cherry on top of your cake there to prove a point.
yes, that's fantastic. So on the flip side, when we see the grade book on the right, we can all look at that and we could say, well, we know the student, if this is a 3-point scale out of three, we know that the student needs to work on defining a number sentence. We can say the student then also has to work on solving number sentences that have brackets. You can see what they're doing well on the one that has braces. So you can see as you're kind of looking at it what the student can and cannot do. Okay. But even this still, I think this gives us a heads up, but I still have a little bit more about why it doesn't connect. Click, if you don't mind, click uh, one more as well. So as we look at this, the question I like to ask is which grade book tells us more about the student learning? Most of us would look and say the grade book on the right does. Okay. And they're going to say we start to get more information. But Daniel, go ahead one more slide. Because if we look at this next one, this is a screenshot that I personally have pulled from Otis. As we look at it, this is a sample grade book. So this is not real student data. So as you look at it, don't worry about if we're putting real student data in there. But this to me is what a grade book should look like when we look in it. We should be able to click into it, see the student's name. You can always put a grade. I know that there isn't a grade in this one, but you can always put a grade in there. But we should be able to see a list of standards and see how our students are doing on those standards right now. And if you ask me, the number one reason why we have an over-reliance on state testing is that our grade books, if you click back one more back to the previous slide, Daniel, our grade books are just a list of assignments, okay? They do not give us valuable information. So when if it's a one school, if a leader goes in and says, I need to know where our students are and what we need to improve on, our grade books do not give us information that is valuable. But the other thing I will tell you is that we're really missing out on is from teacher to teacher, when we label something even as a two or a three, we're really lacking that consistency of what is the high level of expectation we have, which connects back to your previous webinar, Daniel, when we said, do we have clear learning targets, clear success criteria, clear teacher success indicators? When we have those things, when we have those discussions about them, that's when we start to get data that's actually reliable. And in the void of that, when we don't have it, we need to have a way to measure how are our students doing. And that's where the big reliance on standardized testing has come from, is that when for us in the United States, when a state or the country wants to know how are our kids doing, we don't have classroom data that's consistent that's reliable, that's accurate to be able to tell us how students are doing. And so that's why we end up having to, if you ask me, we spend, Daniel, if you don't mind, actually go all the way back in your slides to the one where it was Otis and it said, yeah, keep going. I'll tell you, keep going back, keep going. Because when right here, perfect. When we take a look at this, okay, and you look at all the things on there, because our data from the upper left, whether it's that comes in from your SIS, from what you are doing, sometimes it's over here on with Clever on the right and some other things that you might be having in, but the data that's coming in from our SIS is not accurate and not reliable from teacher to teacher. So then if you look on the lower side, that's why you start to see Smarter Balance, you start to see other NWEA. On the right, you see iReady, iExcel. We put billions of dollars as an educational industry around the world into the things in the bottom because from teacher to teacher, classroom to classroom, our upper left is not accurate and doesn't give us reliable data. And so that's kind of like if you ask me, the heart of it, if we start at the beginning, if we ever actually want to become less reliant on it, I think we need to really get clear about the data that we put into it. And then maybe finally we'll be able to say, our data is clean. It gives us reliable information about where students are. Daniel, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think that's where I was going through with going back and talking about Becky's points, which
Mhm.
is that assessment misalignment, to quote her, is a downstream problem.
Mhm.
What I mean by that is that the misalignment in the classroom or then snowballs to having bigger needs and creating bigger problems.
Yes.
Um, there, there's a lot of curriculum aligned assessments that teachers can purchase or schools can purchase that are capitalizing on that, I
Yes.
think, as well.
Spot on.
Um, I would also say, so I was somewhat ill-informed. I thought our need for standardized testing stems from George Bush and the No Child Left Behind. But you've proved me wrong.
I think it's maybe I think that's how it manifested. I think the root of it comes from classroom to classroom, the misalignment that we have. So yeah.
But that also leads me to another question, which is if there is no if there is no real marker in the classroom that can be thought of as a source of truth, then why would anyone think that an all stakes exam or summative assessment would be any better? My point is that if my curriculum is supposed to be hitting these targets, I don't have any source of truth or data to back that up. But then there's this test with all of the same targets. Can those summative assessments then be act as a reliable t data?
Yeah, so
That
you're
makes
kind of
sense.
asking, yeah, I kind of get what you're asking about, and I think ideally, well, right now we know that from teacher to teacher, classroom to classroom, grade books currently are not reliable. It depends on which adult, which teacher you have, how they interpret the data, how they want to assign scores. There's a lot of things that feed into that, right? But then you ask a good question. I think that's why you see people are always asking those questions. I know for us in the United States, there's some interesting discussions around certain platforms and whether it is providing reliable data or not, Daniel. That's kind of the big question we're seeing now of, and I agree with you of, is it really giving us the whole picture of what the kid can know when we talk about those assessments? So let's dive into some of that, Daniel, as we kind of move ahead with the webinar. As I like your question of like this one here, it gets into this idea of does it really provide the whole picture of the child. And so if we click one more slide ahead, I would say let's talk about the strengths of those tests, right? Well, the first strength is that we're all taking the same test, and that test is being scored the same reliable way. When I think of many standardized tests, I think of, for example, the AP exam is a big one here for us. I know to be able to score an AP exam, you have to go through a rigorous training and they have calibration about this is what it means to score on the AP exam. And just I would say, isn't that a practice we should be doing from class? Like once again, why do we have this misalignment in our grade books? Because we don't always get the opportunity to take the time to be trained. Here's how we should score it. This is the high level rigor we want. This is what when you assess it, Daniel, and I assess it, are we coming up with the same level of score? Like we do that for these other standardized tests, but we don't do it for our classroom assessments. Once again, there's misalignment there, and those companies we know profit off of that. So it gives us the reason why it's there is because it gives us that comparable. Now, I'd say useful, it's somewhat useful is actually the word I probably would use. I should use my own slide of across students from classroom to classroom, across country to country. That's why we have the NAEP exam. So we can say which country does a better job of educating our students, right? But then we dive into the idea, the limitation then really gets into it's just even the design, okay? It's a lot of times a selected response, sometimes short answers, sometimes isolated skills. I think a huge misalignment, for example, is the science exam. Many standardized tests of science exams are students' ability to just read graphs and interpret data. But I taught science for 7 years at the high school level, and we're in labs. We're looking at things, but the standardized tests can't have you in a lab environment doing something. And so there's a whole, big part where just think of just the science misalignment there. So strengths, it allows us to compare something from classroom to classroom. Okay.
Mm.
Limitations, it's not giving us truly that whole picture of what our teaching and learning, what we're doing with our students. So, yeah, what do you think about that as well?
Yeah, and again, if there are any questions in the audience, feel free to pick up or any comments from the audience. I think I think that this is a very interesting topic, especially for the schools that we work with, which are sometimes bilingual schools, Mandarin and English.
Hmm.
And the point is that we're sometimes expecting a native child. So this is a very personal experience, but we're very much expecting a native Chinese speaker to be on the same grade level as a native speaker in English.
Okay.
Um, so that tends to have its own biases. For example,
Mhm.
when schools start to use summative and standardized testing that are from, the US or the UK is another common one. Anything by Renaissance, really. Um, and so what it doesn't capture is the student's capacity or the capacity for growth that they might not have.
Hmm.
So in this respect, I think sometimes that multiple summative assessments should be used together. For
Hmm.
example, a cognitive test to show where there might be any gaps for potential growth based on their capacity for verbal reasoning, so on and so forth. And
Hmm.
then you can even, and then there are similar summative assessments for social emotional learning as well. One is called PASS, pupils' attitudes towards school and self. And so that can give another bit of information. But what I think needs to happen that doesn't necessarily happen, especially in the clients that we work with, is that does the common or formative assessments is that being taught to match the summative assessment?
Hmm.
And a lot of times there's a difference, and rightfully so. There should be a difference, but then is that summative assessment even worth it?
Hmm. That's it. Yeah, there's
So,
yeah, great questions, right? You're asking great questions there, I'll tell you that. Yeah.
I mean, they're not quite necessarily questions as they are as much comments.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's like if we talk a lot about it's about gathering evidence. And when you have evidence you need, do you then sometimes even need that summative assessment if you already know where the students are? And so we dive into that. But I just want to kind of touch on a little bit something else too about standardized testing and something I think that is missing. So when I was a director of teaching and learning, okay, I would have one teacher who was bought in to this is one measurement, but it's a very important measurement. And I want my students to do as well as they possibly can on that measurement. Okay. And I remember I was in that her room one day, and it was when the students would finish, it would a score would pop up on her screen. She could see how the student did, and she would immediately have a quick conversation and a celebration with that student, talking about their growth and how they're doing. Okay. Then I went to another classroom where a teacher said that, and we can see your email right now or your Slack, just so you know, Daniel, we don't have our screen on. So then that
Oh,
teacher said
okay.
in another classroom, it keeps bouncing back and forth on you. I don't know how that's happening.
I
Um,
don't know why either.
yeah, but then I went to another classroom, okay, and we still have the slides up either. So when I went
How
to the
about
other
now?
classroom, the teacher then said, just so you know, this is one standardized test. It doesn't give you the whole picture of who you are as a kid. This test is just one thing. Don't worry about it. You're a bigger, like you're a human being, and it doesn't mean that much. Okay. So picture this. One teacher is that I need you to do your best. The other teacher says this is one piece of data and it doesn't matter that much. Let me ask this, which classroom do you think the students performed better on the standardized test on?
Probably the one that took it more seriously.
And the one that said, I know it's one measurement, but I want you to do well, and I want to see how you're doing on it. And so one key part there is we as adults actually influence the standardized test outcome far more than we may think. And that was fascinating. I'm telling you, like in our building, the classroom that the kids performed the worst on the standardized test was the teacher who then they even had a poster outside of their classroom that said, the standardized test is just one test. I'm so much more. And each kid had a little spotlight about how they're much bigger than just one standardized test. Part of me is like, well, instead of spending all the time doing that poster, maybe we could have been doing something to get our kids help do some goal setting. But then it goes further from there, Daniel. I don't have the study in front of me, but there's a research study that was done, okay, where what one of the important things was how students do on the test. There's a direct correlation between how students are going to do on the test and their relationship with the adult that is proctoring their exam. So a lot
Hmm.
of times we give a standardized test in a classroom or an environment where it's, I think back to when I had to take my ACT, it was my big one when I was in high school. I'd go in on a Saturday to a building I've never been to before, with an adult I've never seen before, in rooms I've never been in before, and I'd take that exam. But what the research showed, and I could always send the link to the study for you, Daniel, I could find it, was that when kids walk in and they walk in, there's an adult they have a relationship with, an adult they trust who says, you know what, it's Saturday morning. I'm so glad you're here. And I'm excited for you to have the opportunity to show us how you can do on this test. The students perform significantly better. Then the research went a little bit deeper from there, Daniel. It was the students then who come from homes with a lower socioeconomic status. So think of like where their needs are even higher, then they did significantly better the stronger the relationship was with the adult in the room. So sometimes when we think about standardized tests, it's just one thing I want to put this in the back burner of people's thoughts of like, what's the environment we're testing those kids? Because the research shows that they need to have a connection, a relationship somehow. If we wonder why they're not doing well on their mental side, we're having an impact on them. So it's just kind of really interesting of like, Especially if you have students who are coming from a really tough place, the stronger the relationship are with the adult of the standardized test, the more reliable and accurate the data is going to be that you get from it. Because we want data to be accurate, that even though it's only one piece, we want that to be reliable and accurate data. So it was an interesting study to kind of think about. I thought we just want to throw that in here just a little bit to think and talk about. So
Well, I think that goes to the next question, which is why does overemphasis on test scores matter? And you went into a bit of a story about that, but uh, especially in China and in other parts of Asia where I'm admittedly a horrible standardized test taker, right?
yeah.
Um, but it does seem like everyone's performance on these tests are getting, when we let's talk about grade inflation, right?
Yep. Yep.
Um, and so are we, does having an over reliance on these standardized tests make us just teaching for the test rather than for gaining knowledge
Yeah, you ask a good question. If
or
we just look at the
learning?
next slide, I always have two parts to that because when I look at the standardized tests, I've never looked at the results and thought to myself, I don't want my own children to be able to do those things. Right. So like when we talk about teaching to the test, the one part of it, I would say, depending on the test, yes, I want my kids to be able to do those things. I want my own children to be able to perform well, not just to do well in the test, because I think those are skills that'll help them in life. So I always put that over here. But then you are correct. We start to over rely on them. As you can see, then as we start to narrow instruction, we start to get rid of teacher professional judgment of we become robots in classrooms. And we always say, like, if you had Becky do this session right now instead of me, we have the same outcomes, the same goals for this, but it's going to sound a little different because there's the art of teaching. And we don't, as you look at the second bullet point, we don't ever want to lose the art of teaching. Okay. That we can have the same high bar of where we're trying to go, but the art and how what you say, how I read what you say, Daniel, may be different than how Becky would read it. And we don't want to ever lose that because all of us have an art of how we connect with our students. And we don't want it to be just robots as we go through. And that is, as you can see, to me, the danger isn't the test itself, because I think I want my students to be able to do those things, but it's when we become over reliant. As you can see, the test is carrying too much weight, and we're not thinking about what do our students need right now to be successful. And we see that as the only thing that's important. And I'm telling you, we see that all the time here as well, Daniel. It's people are only fixated on what are the quick wins we can do to increase our score on that test. And once again, then we pay billions of dollars to these outside companies to have these online programs, or can we just, instead of teaching a small group for 15 minutes, we put kids on a computer program for 15 minutes that aligns to the standardized test. Instead of thinking about our classroom instruction, we spend a lot of time and money on outside platforms and programs that are geared towards just how can we get them to do that test. So I think you can see, to me, it's the test itself is measuring some good things. Those are things we want to know. But if that's all we're looking at, then we're in trouble. So
Yeah. And also definitely I everything's good in harness my inner stoicism, and everything's good in moderation, right? What we want are all these things to be working in concert,
yes.
working together, the formative assessment to the summative assessment. And while it's very difficult to get these things all to be working in concert, it still should be the end goal, and not and we need to start iterating and refining it to get to that end goal as um not as soon as possible, but eventually. Or
Yes.
it might be something we never get to, but we still should be working towards.
Hmm. So we're down to just a minute or two left before we'll open up for
Yeah.
questions here, right? And I love this question here, just to briefly for us, have us touch on it and talk about it is, um, this idea of like if we reduce reliance on the standardized testing, can we still ensure fairness and rigor? Um, and I think yes, we can, ideally. Okay. And we do need alternative approaches. Okay. We need other ways to take a look at how are our students doing. But the hard part is that's where we get to the from classroom to classroom, teacher to teacher. How do we have reliable things? If we advance one more slide, Daniel, for us as we take a look at, then that's where I always say we need a strong, comprehensive system that the standardized test is truly it's one piece, but I would still say our attitude and how we introduce that to our students massively impacts how our kids do. So, Daniel, I would argue, I wonder, you said you weren't a good standardized test taker, but I wonder
Um,
did the adults around you, when you walked into that room, did they say, hey, like what was their attitude the weeks leading up to that? Or did they put you in this spot of, don't worry, it's just one test. It doesn't matter. It doesn't say everything about you. Or do they say, this is an opportunity for us to have you show us how you can do on those skills? And I'm telling you, there's a lot of psychology there. And
Don, these are very repressed memories that I don't want to bring up.
yes, yes. But I'm telling you, like we as adults can influence things far more than we might think, right? And I really wonder sometimes how we tip the scales in the wrong direction, and we wonder why the data, we're like the what the student can do in the classroom doesn't show up on the test. Well, is that because you didn't help them think about you can do your best today? Today it's just one test, but let's have you do your best. I'm proud of you. And we're done. We're going to celebrate the fact that you're finished, and we're going to something, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of, or even the night before, hey, don't forget tomorrow's a test. Make sure you get a good night's sleep, eat a good food. I'll have snacks for you tomorrow when you come, Daniel. Don't worry. Like if you don't have it, like how do we? There's some big psychological things we do there. And so as you can see down below, it's like a comprehensive system that then also says, what are those other things that the test doesn't do? Like I said, that science one, if all like I can't imagine teaching high school science where all I did was have them analyze graphs all day. They would say, why are we even in a lab? Like, why do we have the lab part if we're never going to do that? Those are other skills we need to get from our students. But I'm just going to pause and ask, though, how many of our grade books look just like a standardized test? And kind of going back to that again is we want this comprehensive system, but how many of our assessments connected to your previous webinar with Becky, how many of our current assessments are only giving us data that looks like a standardized test data? And do we currently have that? And do our grade books just give us data we can't even use? And so that's where I always kind of come back to this. Like, I think we are our own worst enemy as educators. We've created this reliance on standardized testing, but we don't even think about how we created that. And I think we can do a lot to help get better. Just like I will also say, and I know I didn't say this before, a standardized test should never be a surprise. Our grade book should tell us exactly how our students are going to do in that standardized test. We should know and not from a direct, we only teach to that. But when we're talking about standards, and if the standardized test is assessing certain standards, we probably have similar standards in our grade book. And if we can't look at our grade book and predict how our students are going to do in that test, that tells us we have a massive misalignment. And there should be some things that the grade book should also tell us some other things because the test doesn't cover it all. But if we are surprised by standardized data, then we're missing something within our classrooms. That's kind of an aha moment for us. We should never be really surprised by how our students do. We should always be able to predict. As a teacher, you should know, yep, I'm going to need to really give the student a lot of love because they're going to need it kind of going into that test. So, yeah.
Well, I like your better question here too.
And we lost it on our screen. Just, flip back on
Yeah,
it.
yeah, I like this better question, which is what do these tests tell us?
Yep.
What do they leave out? And what other evidence do we need before making decisions about
Yeah.
students, teachers, or the schools? But
Yes.
the part I like best is the what do they leave out?
Yes.
And I think that is a common question that we should be asking way, 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 way in the beginning. What does
Mhm.
our grade book leave out? What does this individual formative assessment leave out? If we just ask that simple question, I love how you phrased it here. I think that's something that teachers who attended this webinar can take back tomorrow and start asking themselves or of their assessments or even towards a colleague or a summative assessment that they're looking over and asking themselves, what does this leave out?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Daniel. I agree with you, and just kind of really thinking about that of what other information do we need? Well, I like that you said, what other evidence do we need before making decisions? Because a lot of decisions get made based on that one test. And it's what does it leave out? What are the things we need? That's where I love also when you talk to the very beginning, where you have things like mind print. Like it doesn't get into how the types of information about students and how they learn. It just gives us those flat answers. And there's so many other parts to kids that we can learn about and things that we should be learning about. So uh, thank you, Daniel, for kind of pointing that out.
Right, and I thank you. I thank you, and I thank you, and guys, remember to tune in to the Fires and Grading podcast. Remember to reach out to Don if you are in need of professional development or have any questions, really. What's the best email that they can reach you at?
Sure, it's Don at firsteducation-us.com, or Daniel, they can always reach out to you. And I know
Yeah,
that you reach out to you and your team, and you will, I think, be more than happy to connect. So I think the easiest way, if you ask me truly, is to reach out to Daniel and his team through how you register for this webinar, and they can always connect you with me. So.
happy to give an introduction. Before we sign off, does anyone have any other questions, comments, concerns, feedback?
Yeah. Do you mind if I ask a question?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, that's
and
why we're
and and I'm
here.
sorry, it's probably a question that's much bigger than we can deal with in this moment. But I'm thinking about in the things that you've been talking about, schools reconciling what they do before AP or before IBDP, right? And schools trying to, it seems like they're trying to figure out whether they're going to be standards based or our way, our system until, or they're trying to figure out what framework to use to get to this other platform. And do you think there's no exact answer to this, but do you think there's a way to help schools kind of reconcile some sort of comfort in a self-identity or self-path in terms of standards that kind of help them define who they are before they get to AP, before they get to IBDP, etc.? Does that make sense?
Daniel, what do you think? Do you have early thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think it comes. So this is a very interesting question because I think it comes from this something I spoke to earlier, where schools, especially in this region, have a lack of especially international schools and independent schools have a lack of guiding curriculum. They'll pull a lot from a lot of different places, and and please, if I'm wrong here, come out, or if I'm misspeaking, please interrupt or tell me. So they lack a really formulated learning targets that then feed into these programs, whether it be IBDP or AP. And so I think it could be cleared up by just getting all of the different stakeholders in the same room and saying, this is our unified path or learning objectives to this particular path and that particular path. I think teachers are given a lot of autonomy here, so there's also that issue. And maybe might not agree with a learning target in a particular area. Um, so that is an added difficulty. But just having that set in stone and then requiring them to provide a teacher to provide learning artifacts for those individual learning targets, I would assume would be the best approach.
Mm,
I think sometimes also in our particular region, we have schools that are touting a different type of curriculum to attract new students, and they have then a burden to get these students ready for the AP or IB when maybe that wasn't the best pathway for that student in the beginning. So I think there is a lot of misalignment, uh, and hopefully I answered that somewhat well.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't want to take too much of the time, but it's what you're saying is, there's the question of standards that was raised before. There's a question of how we define our curriculum, but then there's a question of when schools want to present their students to colleges, then we go back to AP, right? We go back to these standardized tests, and it seems sudden, and how do they make the shift? And there's always that question of how to make the shift.
And
Well, yeah, that's a better question for Don,
yeah,
which is like we always tout mastery-based grading, competency-based grading, standards-based grading, but at the end of the day, they want to get into college. They need a GPA, and yeah.
yeah, and I would say the reason why is because once again, from classroom to classroom, our grades are unreliable. An A from you, Daniel, does not mean the same thing as an A from me. And there's the misalignment in terms of how we feed into that. And so that's why we have to have that. We jump to the AP is because we need something where we can say, how did your students in your classroom do compared to my students in my classroom? Because it gets back to that rank and sorting concept of unfortunately kind of where we are. But it's because the data from your classroom is, and when they get that GPA from your school, and the GPA from my school, they don't mean the same thing. And so they want to know how are those students going to do when they come to our school? And ideally, if a student has a GPA from your school and a GPA from mine, it should mean the same because what colleges want to know is will the student be successful? Will they graduate? Because colleges want kids to graduate from them as well, because it looks bad when their graduation rates are low from a university. And so they want to know will kids graduate? So they're trying to predict will kids from your school graduate from mine? And the only way, like we have in the United States, we have colleges that pay thousands of dollars to consulting firms to interpret what your GPA means from kids who are coming from your school in China versus this school right down the street from me here in Chicago. Because they get kids from both schools applying to it. And they want to know how does your GPA compare to our GPA? Because they want the kids to graduate in the end. But once again, from classroom, that's where I would argue the idea of once again, if we can get back to standards, because right now, without a same set of priority standards, it's typically based on you teach what do you like teaching, what are you good at teaching, and what resources do you have to teach. It's not based on the standard is the high bar that we should all be going for, not based on what are you good at, what do you like, and what resources you have. But most of the time, as what most schools are, it's when we ask like how do you prioritize, it's based on those three things. What do I like, what am I good at, and what resources do I have to do that? Not what is the standard my students in my class should get to. And that means I need my students to do A, B, C, and D, not what I like, what am I good at, and what does my resource tell me. So that's kind of one of those big things we want to try to get is cleaner, have a set of standards. So that'd be my first suggestion is as a school, if it's AP or IB, do you have a clear set of standards you can work for towards in your classroom where there isn't a big jump, hopefully, for you? So,
The only thing I would add to that is even curriculum to curriculum, I think one of the things I missed, and thank you, Don, was these priority objectives, the
mhm,
priority standards. While, we've ingested a lot of different curriculums into our platform, and the priorities are generally the same. It's
mhm,
all about the wording and the nonsense. And so sometimes I urge schools to go through and rewrite their priority standards for their particular context.
mhm.
And I think that also makes a difference and then can also gain alignment within your different teachers, different departments and things like that.
Yeah, well said, Daniel.
Any, does that help you at all, Kamal?
No, that makes sense. It's just that never-ending question of how to get things aligned across, you know?
Hmm.
Yep. Well, if you have
Hmm.
any other questions or uh, need first education resources to come out and work with you and your school, let us know. And with that, our hour is up. Hey, Don, I really appreciate the discussion.
Yeah,
Thank you all for attending the webinar.
excellent. Thank you, Daniel, for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Have a good night and have a great day, Don.
You too. Thank you. Yeah, you have a wonderful night for you. So thank you.
All right, bye.
Bye.